My guest today is the very definition of a rugby titan. A Cardiff boy through and through, it's no exaggeration to say, he shaped the history of Welsh rugby. And the signs were there from an early age, a product of the storied Cardiff Blues Academy. He represented his nation at every age group before making his full Welsh debut at just 20 years of age. 2 years later, he'd become Wales's youngest ever captain, leading them to a Rugby World Cup semi-final in 2011, a Grand Slam win in 2012, and back-to-back Six Nations Championship wins for the very first time in Welsh history. The logical next step, I guess, was to take on the captaincy of the British and Irish Lions, once again as their youngest ever. And what a job he did, leading them to a series win down under, their first in more than 15 years. Having achieved so much, he took the brave decision to retire at 29, the result of a career spent leading from the front. It gives me incredible pleasure to welcome Welsh rugby royalty, Sam Warburton, onto the podcast. Sam, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Seb. Very nice introduction. You don't get that every day, so that's it's nice to hear. So good to see you.
Well, I used to have a lecturer at Loughborough University that always reminded us all that we only ever reach perfection on our CV, but I'm probably not even in those few sentences doing full justice. But we can pick up on some of those bits and pieces. Clearly, we've just emerged from a World Cup, and to the untutored eye, which is openly how I watch rugby and play the game at school level very, very modestly. But to the untutored eye, it looked pretty sumptuous fare as World Cups go. Is that how you saw it?
Yeah. Do you know what? I actually think of, say, people like yourselves when I was watching the games recently, because every now and then rugby goes to a new level. And I finished, 6 years ago. So, the game was sort of known as, as physical then. But the World Cup just gone. And I think there was a game against Ireland and South Africa in the group stages. I'm not sure which games you saw.
I was at that game.
This would be a good one to ask you then. And I watched that and I thought, well, obviously you got a much better understanding of rugby, but I thought and I'm used to watching physical games, that's why I love playing it. But I was watching it with a few of the other ex-pros as pundits for the TV. After the first 3 to 5 minutes, we looked at each other and we were like, "Oh my goodness!" It was almost barbaric. It was just jerseys flying everywhere, and I thought somebody's watching this for the first time, and they're going to be thinking, "What on earth is this sport, rugby union?" But did it feel like that to you? Because even to us, we were like, "Wow, the rugby's gone to another physical height," and South Africa were the sort of they were the standard that World Cup. But is that how you felt watching it as well?
Well, I tell you what was interesting. I've been in a stadium on 2 occasions where people have just been genuinely shocked by what they saw. 2000, I was there working actually for the BBC for at the Sydney Games. And Cathy Freeman, I don't think there's probably ever been an athlete that had so much resting on her shoulders. And for 40 minutes before her race, the stadium was almost silent. I mean, there were other things going on. Michael Johnson was racing. There were some outstanding athletes, and everybody was just sort of sitting there nervously focusing on this race. And there was a level of expectation, I think, in that stadium beforehand that I sort of recognized from Sydney. And you're right, after about 5 or 6 minutes, people who were sitting around me, and I was sitting with some chairs of the union, and some former players, and there was just a genuine shock about the physicality. And the only thing I could think was, oh my God, those medical teams are not going to get any sleep for the next 3 or 4 days. There's going to be some really, some big patching up jobs to be done tomorrow morning, because there was one hit early on where everybody just winced and thought, and it just continued in that vein.
It was phenomenal. Don't get me wrong, I love the sport for that reason, and I think I kind of think back to all those years ago. Say, could be wherever, back in Italy, and you had the sort of gladiatorial arenas. It's that sort of human instinct that, and I always think if you just got a drone and some alien just came in from another world and just watched 80,000 people just cheering these 30 men just flying into each other, they would think, what is this? Is this what you're doing to each other? Is this sport? You're cheering physical confrontation and domination. And but weirdly, ironically, that's why I played the sport, and that's what finished me as well. And I was playing football at a young age at under 14s. I played for this one team, and it was from the team were from a fairly affluent area, but I joined it, and I'm not a rough kid, but I just enjoyed the physical aspect of sport, and they had an immaculate disciplinary record. And my first season there, I got something like 3 yellows and a couple of red cards. Not for foul play, because I'm not a dirty guy, but just from being physical, you know. And it was at this point I sort of realized at 14, I was like, I need to play a sport where I'm allowed to try and physically dominate people, you know, and it's rewarded and that's why I love rugby. Like, and mind you, whenever that happens, the one thing I don't like about rugby, I was never the sort of person to drop an elbow, cheap shot. I hated all that. I was really against all that, but I did love trying to win that physical battle. And going back to what I sort of just said, you can understand why people still kind of have that innate instinct where they just cheer that sort of gladiatorial type battle. It almost goes back all those thousands of years, you know. So obviously there's a lot more rules around it these days, but people love watching that. They do, and I think that's what I think really captures the imagination of rugby fans as well. They love that, you know, no matter what happens, politically, economically, you put two countries together and you can just one-on-one just beat them for those 80 minutes, you know, and just put everything else to one side. I think that's what people enjoy.
I'm now going to carbon date myself because I'm a whole heap older than you, but I started watching rugby seriously in the 70s, and I'll come on to that because, of course, the dominant force in rugby in the 70s were those great Welsh sides. I can't remember. I mean, it became sort of ritual humiliation and slaughter when, you know, England never went to the Arms Park. But the interesting thing for me was watching the way the game developed. In terms of its physicality. And I sense that it was that All Black side in the 70s that brought a level of fitness and training. You know, suddenly you'd got, you know, guys that were clearly playing and in reasonable shape, but then suddenly an All Black side turned out and they all looked like decathletes. Yeah. I think it was the side that Sid Going captains. And, you know, it was I sensed that it was actually that period that really started to shape the physicality, the conditioning, the more scientific approach to rugby training, which I guess you guys have sort of been the inheritors of.
New Zealand have always been, and frustratingly, but they've always been the visionaries in rugby. You know, they've always, even though they're not world champions, the things they do, they tend to be one step ahead. And actually, South Africa have been, without going into rugby tactics, have actually done that themselves in the last 4 years, which is why they've won back-to-back world championships. They've really bent the rules to try and seek an advantage and play to their strengths. But that has always historically been the All Blacks. And I think the one player probably really, who really made that mark, you're right, it would have happened through the 70s and 80s. New Zealand won the first World Cup in the 80s. But then in the 90s, when Jonah Lomu came through, he was the first player who I felt... And Adidas, I remember they tweeted this because he was an Adidas athlete, and I thought they got it bang on. They said, we all played the game, Jonah changed it, and it was like R.I.P. Jonah because he passed away. And because he'd be a physical freak player nowadays, and he sort of really took that New Zealand physicality to a whole new level where rugby's kind of changed from being this open sevens type game that we might see in the Olympics to this physical combative war that it's almost become now, with there's still there's obviously skill involved and a lot of tactics, but more often than not the most physical team wins more often than not in rugby. But I thought Jonah Lomu from New Zealand was the epitome of that. But New Zealand have always been the people the team that side is chasing down. They've always been excellent, and they're in their own little corner of the world, you know. Like, rugby was introduced to them, obviously the game rugby started in England, you know. And I actually said that to an England international recently. I said, do you know why it's called rugby? And he said, why? I said, well, because it was first played in rugby. He went, oh my God, I never knew. I was like, you play for England, mate. Like, you should know this.
It took a Welshman to explain the history of...
Maybe I'm a little bit of a rugby anorak, and that's why I fell into broadcasting.
Well, yeah. That's quintessentially the best definition of missionary work I've heard for a long time. I want to pick up on something you said a few moments ago. And this is the beauty of these conversations, because It's just something that made me think, because it almost answered one of the questions I was going to throw at you, which was, you chose rugby not in a for skullduggery or foul play, but you chose it because you actually liked the process of physically dominating your space, your sport. I've always rather thought that we make a mistake in thinking that you pick a sport. I've always thought that your sport picks you, and it finds those natural inclinations, those natural characteristics. You may not even realize it at the time. Some people drift towards team sports. Some people, like me, end up, being comfortable in their own company for 100 miles a week on moorland roads and things like that. I'm fascinated that your background, of course, is quintessentially a suffusion of landscape, geography, friends, education. Because the school you went to was, had an unbelievable history of sport. I think Gareth Bale was in your year at school, or in and around that period. But the one thing I'm guessing I'm interested in is, if you look at the small populations in global sport that have gone on to absolutely dominate a sport, and I've sort of jotted them down here. You've got Kenya, you've got Jamaica, sort of circa 3 million people, the dominant force in the last 35, 40 years in sprinting. You've got New Zealand, another relatively small population, 5 million, and dominant force in rugby. It's often what is embedded in a community. And I guess that you were in part, what is Wales? Again, sort of roughly 3 million people. And a sport that is sort of focused on a couple of valleys. It's an extraordinary story, particularly if you look at the way the game developed and became such a, so totemic of Wales during the 70s.
Yeah, you're so right. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to talk here like Wales are world champions. The 70s team, I think, would have had a good run at it, mind, going back then. But I think, and our current coach at the moment, Warren Gatland, someone asked him, how do you measure success as Welsh coach? And he said, by overachieving, because it's difficult to say for Wales. Mind you, if I was, I'm not trying to preach for a job now, but if I was, say, in charge of the Welsh Rugby Union, I would put out a bold statement and be like, look, my aim here is to make Wales into world champions, male and women's team, within the next 8 years. That's got to be the goal. But being realistic right now, they're not going to get there. But Wales do significantly overachieve for a small nation with 3 million. And going back to what you said about culturally, I remember being in primary school and football was my first sport. I loved athletics as well. I used to do pentathlon. You mentioned then about decathletes. I think a lot of rugby players are kind of in that decathlete mold. You've got to be quite good at everything to play rugby in certain positions, Similar to a decathlete, you've got to have endurance, you've got to have that fast twitch ability. You need to be able to jump. You need to, there's very similar traits in decathletes and rugby players.
All the physical literacies, actually.
Yeah. You've got to be good at everything, which a lot of athletes they're on one end of the continuum or the other. They're either like sort of endurance or they're sort of extreme fast twitch. Rugby players, you've got to kind of have a bit of a hybrid. But I remember playing football because I was originally a football player, and I imagine this happens all across the country. Don't get me wrong, football's still a big sport in Wales, but I was like, when I was young, I was tall and quick, and I was like, to my headmaster, I was like, yeah, I'm playing football. And he saw me sort of like winning races and things. He was like, mate, and I remember he just gave me the rugby ball. I was like, you got to play rugby, and I played it, and straight away I sort of just picked it up and enjoyed it. But that would happen across.
Sam, what age was that?
About 9. I was only 9. I was in year 5 now, so I was like a year below playing for the year 6s. And he said, just go on the wing and just follow. So basically, the wingers have to be outside what is the number 13. He said, just stay outside number 13. That's all you got to worry about, and he'll give you the ball, And he just gave me the rugby ball, and that was literally how my introduction to rugby. I remember actually being on the bench one game for Cardiff Schools when I was like only 10. It's my first game for Cardiff Schools. I didn't know the rules because I always just played for the school. He said to stay outside the winger. And so I was on the bench and somebody just made a break down the touchline it was like Bridgend, this other town in Wales. And I was playing for Cardiff. I didn't know what to do. And I was on the bench. I was like, why is no one tackling him? So I just ran off the bench and just smoked him. And then they had to stop the game. Like, no, that's Sam, you're on the bench. You can't do that, you know. But yeah, I think it's just like you said, it's just sort of culturally embedded. If you're quite I mean this in the least arrogant way. If you kind of you can see, like you would have seen it when you were sort of 10. If you've got an athletic ability that some other kids don't have, you know, the teachers will more often not say, listen, you've got to hold this oval shaped thing, you know. So that is very much a Welsh cultural thing. And you're right, it's only, even up north, it's not really explored. Up north is a football kind of region, so you're looking at really the 2.2 million where it's heavily concentrated down South Wales. Up north is somewhere which needs to be explored, but that's a political decision for another day. But Wales, yeah, there have been some great players from the north who've come from us, but it needs to be tapped into more. So even then, we're still, the actual rugby side of things still makes it smaller again. So Wales they're very good at overachieving for the size of their nation. I think that's down to culturally how much people love rugby around their clubs, their towns, the valleys. You know, it's a working man's game, rugby in Wales. You see the class system. It's when you play England schools, you know, it's just chalk and cheese. You know, we play England schools growing up, and we take them to like Aberavon and post-match functions. You're eating off polystyrene plates and beans and cheese. And we go to England, and they're in these like spectacular grounds in the middle of the countryside, and they're all like all go to private school, you know, and it's very different. But then when you get to the professional level, it's very strange. You go to any rugby environment across Wales, England, the world, and they're all the same. You know, the characteristics of people who play rugby, they're all the same, which is what's lovely about the game. And, you know, that was seen when the Lions even played New Zealand in the tour in 2017. There's that very iconic picture. We all mixed together at the end. Rugby cultures, no matter where you are around the world, are all very similar. But Wales is definitely embedded in that culture.
I'm actually interested in that. Was, again, just a quick digression, but actually athletics is almost entirely a state school sport. I'm probably going to get a heavy postbag after saying this, but very few top athletes that have made it into any British team have actually come out of the public school system.
Really?
In rugby, until relatively recently, it was very much the other way around. And, you know, it's just one of those quirky things. I mean, I was only ever at a state school, and I have a massive debt of gratitude to my geography teacher who, you know, used to ask me quietly during lessons, how's my mileage? And I'd say, well, I'm a bit down this week. And he'd go, off you go.
Really? I love that.
He also taught religious instruction, so it probably tells you a lot about my spiritual underpinning as well. Look, I'm interested here. We've touched on landscape, we've touched on culture, we've touched on geography and the impact that has had on you and your love for rugby. The one area I'd like to just briefly explore is the role of family. Were parents really supportive of what you wanted to do? Did you have rugby players in the family? You know, was it something that, you know, was sort of very much a part and parcel of Saturdays and Sundays?
Do you know what's one thing I haven't been able to figure out? And by the way, my parents, they're both still around. I'm very fortunate, and they were both amazing for me. And I'm a young parent now, 7. I got a kid who's 7, 3, and a baby. And I'm going to follow my parents' leads. Like, and I've heard this sort of quote, like coaches coach, parents support. So, and I had that. My parents were amazing at that. Every game they were there. You know, I wasn't from a family who had lots of money. So, you know, my dad would walk a couple of miles every day, like every time I played for the school, to come and watch me. And then he'd walk back, and like whether they, you know, they'd always stretch themselves, get whatever kit I needed, drive me around everywhere, cancel holidays so I could go train with the academy every day of the summer. Like, they were unbelievable at supporting me. My dad didn't know diddly squat about rugby, so which is great because he could just stand in the post and just watch me. Even for Wales, I come off the pitch for Wales. They have a family room next to the dressing room, and I could get man of the match, play really well. I'd walk into the family room 20 minutes after the final whistle. And you also like that all the parents are there and family, and you turn up in your kit with all the players, just the Welsh boys. And my parents would be like, "Did you play well?" And I was like, "Yeah, no, I had a good game today, Dad." You know, so he had no idea, you know, if I played well. So I loved my parents and what they supported me. But like, I hear people, like when I listen to other podcasts, they go, "Where did you get your?" So I talk about like my mindset and my obsession to win and to be as good as I can. I still can't really figure out where that came from, because I wasn't from like a really deprived family, so it wasn't like motivated financially. It wasn't that. I didn't necessarily have like a role model who came from my area who I thought, oh yeah, I could follow his leads. I just had this deep burning desire at the age of about, I'd say 13, 14, where I suddenly decided I'm playing for the Lions. And I'll tell a quick story on that. It's my dad was a fireman. He came home from work and he had this piece of paper and he said, oh, Sam, fill out this piece of paper just for a colleague. His son's doing some homework. Just write down what you want. And I think it might be to do with the fact I'm a twin, but we can go into that a bit later, maybe. But because we were so competitive, but we're best of friends, so maybe we really drove the best out of each other. Because we were the same in school, like we revised like crazy together, each other's biggest fans, but really competitive at the same time. It was a really brilliant relationship to have. But he brought home this piece of paper, my dad, and he said, "Oh, just write whatever you want." So I looked at this piece of paper, and it just said name, age, sport, position, and ambition. So I just wrote down name, Sam Warburton, age 14. Sport, rugby union. Position, I was an open side flanker, number 7. I love number 7. And then it just said ambition. Now, I'm not saying I achieved this, but I'm just saying the story as it is. I wrote down on ambition, British and Irish Lions, rugby legend, and I give it back to my dad. And I remember he said, "What, oh, Sam? What are you doing? You can't write the word legend. It's a bit arrogant, you know." I remember saying, but that's what I want to do, Dad. Like, I don't just want to just play for Cardiff or Wales. I want to be like, I want to be one of the best guys. You know, I want to be one of the best who's ever played for the Lions. And that Christmas, my dad bought me a Lions shirt with the number 7 sort of like printed on the back. I wore it everywhere, like non-school uniform days, training in the gym at home. I was obsessed with it. And even when I was in school, I remember saving up all my pocket money, so I converted my garage into like a multi-gym. So it'd be like all spiders and cobwebs, it's proper rock, yes, but I had a multi-gym in there when I was 15, training like crazy. Used to go running around late at night to try and be really fit. I changed my jam sandwiches and honey sandwiches in school for tins of tuna because I knew it was good protein, and my packets of crisps for fruit because I knew it was much better for me. The school would open up the gym at lunchtimes for me, similar to like you said about your geography teacher letting you out. You know, they let me train and they really supported me on my journey, which is why I loved, which is high school. Then say like fast forward then 10 years from probably that moment. And it was when it was my first ever test match of the British and Irish Lions. And I got my jersey the night before in this jersey presentation. And normally in the dressing room on the Saturday, so the day after, you turn up and your jerseys are all there, beautifully laid out, 1 to 23 on your pegs, as you can imagine, the changing room. But on this Friday evening, we did the shirt presentation. And it's a real honor to play test match for the Lions. And I figured out that with the playing numbers across the 4 countries, I was like, as a kid, when I used to play, people were like, "Are you nervous about playing against that player from Ystrad Mynach? You know, he's in the Dragons Academy or something, you know, when we're playing in Wales." I'm like, no, I'm nervous about my performance because I want to play well, but I'm not worried about playing against him, because if I'm going to be number 7 for the Lions, I can't just be the best player in my school or best player in Cardiff for my age group. I got to be the best in Wales, England, Scotland and Ireland, and over probably a 16, 17-year age range. I got to be that one guy who wears the number 7 shirt. And I figured out from looking at the number of registered players, it's a 1 in 75,000 chance that you wear, you know, on average, that you wear that number 7 shirt test match for the Lions. So I was like, I'm playing test match Lions. So I was thinking, you know, I knew I was athletically quite lucky in the sense, you know, I'm like 6'3", I was quick, I was fit, which was a good head start. But I thought, but more importantly, I thought, he doesn't train as hard as I do. He doesn't eat as healthy as I do. He doesn't recover and focus on his sleep and nutrition like I do. He doesn't have my desire. He doesn't have my mental toughness. So he doesn't have my professionalism. This guy can't be as good as me. He just can't. And so I'm in this sort of jersey presentation. I get my shirt, and the kit man comes up to me night before, about to play Australia for the first test of the Lions. So I got my number 7 shirt. He goes, "Oh, Sam, normally these are in the dressing room, but so do you want me to get them back off the boys, or do you want to keep it and take it to the game?" I remember saying, "Mate, there's no way you're taking this off me now. This is mine." Because about 6 months after my dad gave me my shirt, I remember putting it away. And he said, "Sam, where's that Lions shirt I got you for Christmas? Because it cost me a bit of money." And this was, I was 14, 15, just after I first filled that piece of paper. I remember putting it away and saying, "Dad, I put it away because the next thing I've got to wear has got to be the real thing. I'm fed up of being this pretender." I went up to my hotel room on this Friday night for the test match. I laid it out on the bed with the number 7 facing up, and I pushed out all the creases and I stared at it. And then I went to leave the bedroom to go get some dinner with the lads. Then for the second time, I went back and stared at this Seven shirt. And I went to leave the bedroom. For the third and final time, I went back and stared at this shirt just beautifully facing up at me. And that was the moment that I realized that 10 years of like hard work, sacrifice, commitment had paid off, because you see this, especially this younger generation. There's no such thing as that overnight success. Like, you know, people might see yourself running the Olympics or myself playing for the Lions, think, oh, he's done well for the last year to get there. It's like, no, that's 10, 15 years.
That's the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. That's 10, 15 years of diligence that people haven't seen, but has got you to that, as you say, which is a nice analogy, that tip of the iceberg. And that was kind of my mentality. And I don't know where that came from. Like, my parents are really supportive. I mentioned my twin brother, but I was just desperate from a young age just to do something that other people couldn't do.
But, you know, sometimes it's not an exact science. There is just an intensity and a passion. You know, you see it in great musicians, you see it in great academics, you see it in people that, you know, just, you know, are born with that, you know, and yeah, there are externalities, there are all sorts of, you know, the landscape, the job, all the things we've talked about, but there is in some people just that burning ambition to figure out what's around the corner and just be restlessly curious about it.
100%. I remember asking you, and like, you thought nothing of it, and I was like, "That is so unusual," but in a good way, and it shows there's something special there. I don't think I remember asking you, when did you realize that you were fit? And I can't remember. You ran, was it something like 5 or 10 kilometers or something? You used to go on runs when you were like 5 or 6 years old or something. I can't remember.
Yeah, I did. I just ran for the hell of it. I mean,
that's
it's
amazing. And even
it's
then,
a charitable description of what I do now, but I still get, you know, it's. You know, for me, for you, it was, you know, physically dominating a pitch. For me, it was just the sheer pleasure of going out and running. Let me, again, you know, you're throwing out such gems here. I'd like to pick up on something that I think I heard you say, which is, you know, the resilience, the focus, you know, sitting back and recognizing that you've done this for 10 years before anybody's, you know, actually Phil Knight, the great visionary behind Nike, the owner of Nike, I asked him a similar question.
Yeah.
Well, he on the podcast, one of your predecessors on the podcast, he described Nike as the 56-year overnight sensation. Yeah. And I guess it's the same thing in any, you know, you sort of see the, you know, the balance sheet, you see the Forbes rating, you see the billions of whatever turnover it is, but, you know, he started with, you know, working with a coach that happened to be a track coach. He was a marketing major, track and field, and, you know, the rest is history, and it's just a long slog. But what I'm interested here is that, you know, you made your debut at 20, you were captain at 22, you led the Lions at 24. You know, it's Grand Slams and all sorts of things. What I'm fascinated in is, how did you actually deal with that pressure at such relative tender years in your career? Those sorts of that sort of status, I'm guessing, in most sports probably doesn't start beckoning until, you know, you're at least into your late 20s. You know, I know sport is getting younger, and, you know, people are assuming more responsibility early on, but my God, to have been Welsh captain at 22 in that cauldron of expectation, that, you know, where would you start? How did you deal with that?
I do think, being perfectly honest, I haven't really said this, to be honest. You mentioned I finished young. I do think maybe if I was given, and I'm not saying, I'm so thankful the coach made me captain, and I'm so thankful that I was talked into doing it, because it set me up, and I've learned so much from doing it. But the emotional toll I found doing it probably difficult, and probably might have shortened my career, because I felt I couldn't then just drop back. You know, I felt if I couldn't be captain and couldn't be the best I could be, then I didn't really want to play, which is probably why I finished a bit young. I might have had a couple of years left in me, but I didn't want to wilt away. But yeah, when I was young, you know, I was captain for like Wales at 18s level, 19s and under 20s level, but I thought I'd just do it now. It's on the rugby CV. It looks good for when I want to try and get a professional contract, but I'll never be a captain, because I was always I'm always painfully shy and introverted. I mean, I can do a podcast like this, I can speak on stage and go on TV. But when people actually know me, I'm very quiet. Like if I can get very anxious about certain social situations, like because I just, I'm not a sort of person who goes into a room and just starts talking. I kind of keep myself to myself. I live a very quiet, try to be fairly secluded. I'm a very introverted kind of person. I've got my sort of group of friends.
Your long walks up on the Brecon Beacon.
Yeah, exactly. I really like just going away and just walking with the dog, and not having to speak to anyone. I'm very comfortable in my own time. It's probably why I've survived in the broadcasting world, because you travel a lot to games to and fro on your own. You stay in hotel rooms on your own, and I'm comfortable with that, which is why I quite like that. But when I was young, so I did this captaincy at age group level, and then I was playing for Wales. I could tell they were sort of gradually giving me kind of leadership responsibilities, presenting in front of the group and things. But then they suddenly dropped the bombshell on me. Oh, I want you to be captain for the World Cup. Maybe a month for the World Cup was going to start at the age of 22. I did it for 3 games before that moment, which were just World Cup warm-up friendlies, because our current captain was injured. So I just do these 3 and that's it. And 2 against England, 1 against the Barbarians. And I remember he asked me on the Monday, the current coach at the minute, Warren Gatland. And I said, I can't do it. I was like, and I listed off about 10 other players who I said, he should be captain. It should be him or him or him. And he went, no, I want you to do it. I went, oh no. I said, I can't. He went, right, I thought you might say this. So follow me. Took me into the analysis room, and he said to me, watch this clip. So he got one of the analysis boys to get this clip of me from the game on the weekend. And the clip was just us playing England. It was about 2 minutes to go. We won a really important penalty, which I contributed to. And he just pointed at me on the screen, and I come like marching in on the screen. I'm like punching the air, kind of quite aggressively celebrating, because I knew that penalty was going to secure the win for us. Picking guys up off the floor, tapping everyone, motivating them. Then went to our number 10, spoke about, what was going to be the next play for the next minute or two, relayed that to the forwards. All this happens in about 15, 20 seconds. And he just let the clip play out, and he just made me watch myself. And he went, that's leadership, and that's what I want you to do. It's not these big Churchillian speeches. It's not speaking in front of a big room of people. That's not what it's about. I want you to lead by what you do and the way you are in training and on the field, and your determination to win. I want to sort of rub off on the rest of the team. And I thought, I can do that. That's fine. And I was very lucky at the time I was working with, and back in 2011, it's a little bit of a taboo subject then. And even amongst coaches, because they used to see it as weakness, but I was using, and Wales were very good actually at this. They sort of quite early on the curve of using a sports psychologist within the team. Now, athletes have used it, but in team sports, they didn't really have the sort of sports psych in this sort of time. But I said, that's fine, I'll do it. And he was called Andy McCann. I said, but I want Andy McCann to come to the World Cup with us. And we had a team meeting that afternoon, and the coach said, right, you can take like 33 players, we're going to New Zealand, and you're only allowed to take like 25 members of staff, for example, which sounds a lot, but you got all sorts, medics, physios, coaches, fitness, sure, all that. Yeah, there's loads, media. So there's one space left, and he said to the boys, right, we can only take one more member of staff. There's a few members left, but there's only one seat left on the plane. He said, right, hands up. And it was either a video analyst, or it was Andy McCann, the sports psychologist. Hands up for the video analyst. And a couple of boys put their hands up. So he looked quite confused. He said, all right, okay, put your hands up for Andy McCann. And almost the whole group of players put their hands up. Yeah. He was like, wow, I didn't realize that many guys were using him, because you have that relationship in private behind closed doors. And what I did with Andy, he went to the World Cup, and we developed what was called my leadership compass back then, because I had no clue how to be a captain. So I sat down with Andy, and he said, and I'll whip through these really quick. He said, right, Sam, I want you to tell me the 4 traits that you want to be able to demonstrate daily that you think are going to make you a good leader and a good captain. And he helped me with these as well, because that's what he does. He's almost a leadership coach as much as anything else that he does. So by coincidence, they're all P's. So the first one I said is professional. And maybe people might be able to get that from that by this bit of conversation already, but I want to be the best professional there is, whether it's the way I apply myself to training, my nutrition, everything, like being on time, dress codes. I'm going to be the best pro and make sure that I set the bar really high. That was an easy one for me to do that, because I do that anyway. We wrote down professional on the north of my compass. moved around to East, then I'm really positive. I'm always a really positive guy. Always believed I was going to win. Not naively. Like if you said to me, "Oh, Sam, New Zealand, can you beat New Zealand?" I knew what they were going to do in the press. They want the headline of Sam says we can beat New Zealand. I'm like, look, New Zealand are a better team than us. They've won 2, 3 World Cups, whatever it is. Are they a better team than us? Yeah. Can we beat them? Yeah, of course we can. You don't have to be better to beat them, you know. So on the day we can beat them, of course we can. So I was always just really positive, you know. So I was like professional, positive, they were easy. The third one, which is one Andy suggested, which I'm glad he did, and this is where I needed that coach, and he said people. And as I've mentioned, I was naturally very introverted. As a coach, a captain rather, you need to be able to get information from everywhere, from your players, from your coaches. You need to be approachable. So I needed to develop relationships with all the people in the team. Don't have to be everyone's best friend, but I needed to make sure that people felt comfortable in speaking to me if they had an issue, which I needed to sort out. And also getting the right
That's
people.
an interesting challenge. Did you manage to maintain that slight separation, though?
It was hard.
You know, you're reaching out, you're trying to meld a team, particularly as a captain, but you want that slight distance, which doesn't lend disenchantment, but at the same time gives you the ability to be tough and, I guess, gentle in each equal measure according to the situation.
100%. It was hard. That was the hardest one because it wasn't really me naturally. I'm a confrontational guy on the field. I'm not a verbally confrontational guy, you know. So, and plus, like, you know, I think people get this wrong with errors. People like to be in rugby very harsh on people who make human error. I'm like, I would only ever be like that if somebody was being deliberately negligent. If someone made an error, that's not when you call someone out for making a mistake. That's when they need support, and you know, you need to make them feel confident and wanted. That's not when you call someone out, and that's why I think leaders get it wrong a lot. But then under that people banner, we had getting the right people around me. So we developed a leadership group of maybe 5 or 6 people. And some of those guys helped deliver the things that I'm not very good at. So we had guys in that leadership group who were much better at delivering standards than perhaps myself. I did it in a I led by example kind of way, where some people were much more comfortable in being able to drive things verbally more than myself. So I had a group of 6 people who we'd meet every Monday, senior players, coaches, and then we would set the standard and what we wanted for the week to shape like and look like, and we would all drive that. So having those people around me as well, your sort of lieutenants, really help drive that culture and that standard that you want to deliver. And then the last one was performance. Ultimately, you have to do what you've got to do to the best of your ability, because I've had captains who walk the walk but don't talk the talk, you know. Sorry, they talk the talk,
yeah,
they don't walk the walk.
yeah.
And you, even in a team sport, you still have to, very much like an athlete, you still have to remain very selfish in your own individual preparation to do what you want to do and make sure you do it well. And again, I mentioned Andy McCann. He was speaking to a room of like CEOs and MDs, and he said, take your job title away from you and go into a brand new organization. The way you behave for a week, would people follow you if they didn't know your title? And that's how I felt I had to be as a captain. You don't walk around and use the power to your advantage. You still be you be authentic, but you lead by your behaviors and the way you are around people. So that was my leadership compass. And I still use that in life today after rugby. So it was positive, professional, people, and my performance. And I thought if I could do those 4 things daily, I'll be a good captain. That's how I dealt with all those young pressures and environments.
But I'm interested here because you started off this, you know, little segment by saying you had no idea at the age of 22 how to be a captain. Actually, you had every idea, given what you just said.
It. Yeah.
No, I mean it was instinctive. I mean, you identified the professionalism, you identified the performance. Okay, you got a little bit of guidance around people, but I think you're being characteristically modest here. I think you actually had every ingredients in place.
Do you know what? I kind of
a captain.
I've almost found I've got more credibility as a captain since I finished, because people then might hear me talk about the game on TV now, and the way I played, you would probably be understandably. I'd understand if you thought I wasn't really a tactician or a student of the game. I just wanted to go out and tackle and hit things, but I was actually very studious. So I kind of think back actually to how I was as a player. And I think, yeah, I probably did have a lot of the ingredients for a captain, but I just didn't realize it. I just had this stereotypical view.
Look, I think that comes with time and place, but from everything you just said to me, you started off saying I had no clue about how to be a captain at 22, and it's pretty evident to me you actually did. We did a podcast not long ago. Actually, it was my turn to be in the hot seat with you, and we laughed about something I said, which is that, you know, weak leaders like weak people around them. And I'm reminded of something that when I was sort of reading around this subject and trying to understand a little bit more about what made you tick, I was fascinated in one instance that you actually talk about, and clearly evidence that the resilience, the comfort and being comfortable in your own skin, because I guess when you're captain of the Lions at 24 and a seasoned Irish international like Paul O'Connell suddenly takes the team talk, that didn't faze you. And I'm guessing that is, again, the best example of not being fazed by having strong people around you, actually relishing being in that environment where somebody actually feels enough buy-in to stand up and give that talk. And I understand he apologized afterwards, and you wouldn't have anything, you know, to do with it. You were absolutely happy that he was prepared to take that sort of leadership role.
Well, I love that quote that you said, and you know, I use that when I do talks now, so I think it's so true. And I laughed because I was like, oh my goodness, you're bang on, because I'm sure you've seen leaders, whether it's in politics, whether it's in sport, it's in business, who they want to be the big I am on their own, and they think they know everything. And that's the person who's going to fall flat on his face. Where when I was young, I talk about getting buy-in from senior players. It's probably because I went to them and was like, I need you. I need you to drive this for me. And I think once you say that to someone, they suddenly realize, oh, this guy's not, he's not thinking he can do this on his own. He needs me. And you get that buy-in back. And that Paul O'Connell example you're on about, I was 24. He was probably 10 years my senior, 34. I thought he was going to be Lions captain. He had a bit of an injury before, so we only just got back fit, which is maybe why the scales tipped in my favor. But he's a very, well, he's confrontational on the field, and he was verbally very motivating as well. Very inspiring guy. And he just spoke at the end of a session. I didn't like to speak too often. I didn't want people to hear my voice too much, but he just spoke at the end of a session really passionately. Then I remember thinking, oh, that's brilliant. That's awesome. Because going back to my people, you know, I sort of had this leadership group of people that I used when I was training. So I'd encourage them to speak up in training. So anyway, a couple of years go by, we're doing it for the Lions, and he spoke, and after we walked off at the session, and he said, he put his arm around me and went, oh, Sam, I'm so sorry. And like, it was nice for me, because 10 years ago I was watching him play for the Lions when I was deciding that I wanted to play for the Lions. He was one of my like heroes, I guess. And I was like, oh no, Paulie, that's great. I said, that's kind of how it works with myself and say Alan Wynne and all these sort of legends who are playing for Wales. They drive a lot of that. And I'm fairly quiet the first half of the week, and I kind of speak more towards the end of the week. And he was like, oh, that's how we work with Ireland, with myself and Brian O'Driscoll. The rugby fans will know who these players are. And I was like, mate, that's great. Let's do this, you know. And you figure out those relationships quite quick. But yeah, you need to be able to get good leaders and good people around you. One, to challenge you in a healthy way, but two, to also help drive the team. You can't do it on your own. Otherwise it's mentally exhausting. So yeah, that's why I love that quote you said, weak leaders like weak people around them, because it's easy. If it's easy to have a load of yes men around you. But as I say, like, you know, hard decisions, easy life, easy decisions, hard life. If you don't want people there to challenge you and just take the easy decision all the time, you're going to end up finding yourself in quite a sticky place. But if you have people who are willing to challenge you, and you accept that, and you know, you don't have to accept everything, but it all just bottlenecks to you. And the good bits, you go, yeah, I really like that. Let's do that. It really helps empower the rest of the team. It gives them that sense of responsibility and that you're caring for them as well. So yeah, I really like that quote. And that's probably a good example of when it worked well on that Lions tour in 2013.
We talk a lot about resilience. I mean, if we're being blunt about it, it's a slightly overused word. It's a bit like legacy, really. And we probably can't figure out a better description. But let's settle on resilience for a moment, because at each and every stage of your career, that's the thing that jumps out to me. It's your ability to cope and deal with the good times and the vagaries that sport throws up every now and again. I was at the final in Paris, the All Blacks South Africa game. And I'm not raking over the embers here, because I'm not remotely interested actually in the circumstances at the time. I'm much more interested in the recovery period. But it's quite hard to escape the parallel between the red card early on in the game for the All Blacks and the one that you got in the 2011 semi-final. And again, that's a moment that actually I'm not saying I'm not interested in, but that's not where I want to take this next bit of the conversation. I'm fascinated in what you drew down on from all the things that we've already talked about. That, well, I mean, a year later, you were a Grand Slam winner. 2 years later, a winning Lions captain. You didn't let that derail you, where there are some who, the missed penalty in the final is actually almost the swan song of a career.
All those memories, you're absolutely right. New Zealand's captain got sent off early-ish in the game, in the final. And I got sent off in the semis, you mentioned it, and all those memories came flooding back. And I actually love those two terms that you use, particularly resilience. What I think resilience is, and this is what, was I the most talented player in my age group? No. There was players better than me. I was good, and I probably stood out. I was good, but I wasn't the best guy. But the reason I got to the top, and that sounds a really arrogant term, but the reason I got to where I did, was because I was willing to do all the mundane, boring things that no one else my age was willing to do, from the age of 15 all the way through to when I was 20, 22. So, over 5 years, I was willing to put in all the running sessions, all the weight sessions, all the nutritional habits, everything that I needed to do. I was willing to do it for 5-6 years, which is why when you see a freakish 20-year-old playing rugby, people go, he's taken something, or he's just a genetic freak. It's like, no, he's just done what 99.9% of kids aren't willing to do. And if you're willing to just do that work, you will beat 95% of the opposition already, just because most people just aren't willing to do that level of detail and for that long. That's what I think resilience is. It's just doing those things when, and I remember saying to my brother, we were going to train once when we were younger. He's like, I don't feel like training today. Don't get me wrong, there's a difference between when you're exhausted and you need to rest. There's a difference when you don't feel like training. I said to him, it's not about training when you just feel like training. Sometimes it's about training when you don't want to train and just getting the work done. And I remember he was like, oh my God, you're so right. And
grinding it out.
Yeah, you just got to get it done, Ben. Get it done, and it's in the bank, and you'll be better for it. It's just another little step forward, and you got to have that mentality. Like, there's going to be people who don't. There was people who didn't believe in me. There was people who didn't think I was going to make it, who would say that so and so was better. But I was like, I just wouldn't accept it. I just wouldn't accept it. And I think resilience, and whether it's in sport, whether it's in life, or whatever you go into, it's those who just don't get derailed, who just keep going. And I did a book, and it was just called Refuse to Be Denied. There was a song I used to listen to, a heavy metal song, which I like to listen to gear me up. And it's a bit full on if you're not into metal, but I used to put it on with headphones for a game, and this guy just let rip at the start of the song. But the song was just called Refuse to Be Denied, and that was just like my sort of mantra throughout my whole career. Even if you do get denied, just you got to get back on the horse and prove it wrong. So when I got sent off, that was the moment that probably changed my life, where I went from just being a fairly recognised player in Wales, starting, to suddenly being like in the rugby world, a worldwide kind of known figure, obviously being sent off on that kind of stage. But then, as you mentioned, 4 months later, we won the Grand Slam against France, which is the sort of European Championship. We won all our games, had a clean sweep. Then 12 months later, we won back-to-back championships for the first time. And then 3 months after that, 15 of the Welsh lads went on the Lions tour and won with the Lions. I think, had I not gone through, and us as a group gone through that adversity, I don't know if it would have given us the motivation to bounce back. And I was thinking, I don't want this to define me, this red card. I want to be known for, I don't want to be the guy who's known as who got sent off. And I guess I added another word to my leadership compass when this happened. And I learned this after the World Cup. I went to the World Cup with my original leadership compass, my 4 Ps. And by coincidence, it's the 5th P. And when I got back from that red card, I lost my granddad, who I was very close with. I used to stay home and watch sport with him every Friday night. as a teenager. You know, when I got my mates, I'd stay and watch sport with my granddad. But I got home from the World Cup and he passed away, and it gave me that fifth word on my leadership compass, which I use now. So which was perspective. And sometimes when you think that the world is against you and you're going through a stressful situation, and look, you'd be the same. I've done a lot of charitable work through your rugby career where you meet some people in some very unfortunate predicaments. And suddenly you think,
Yeah.
oh my God, what on earth am I worrying about? And they're really, some of them are really upsetting stories. And then when I am going through those moments, I think of those people, or I think of, and it's not maybe till you're older, till you've probably seen some of this adversity or experienced it yourself, that you have that perspective, just to lift yourself out your little bubble, put yourself back in the real world and go, look, actually what I'm going through isn't actually that bad. So I had that perspective as well. And that's probably what got me through that red card. I didn't want it to define me, but I also had that perspective that there's much worse things that can happen in life. I said that in an interview.
Well, it's the great thing about sport, isn't it? That it gives you, I mean, I absolutely was a product of that. It gives you a feel for the human condition at an age far earlier than often right. in other walks of life, because you see the human condition in the change room, you see it from winning, you see it from losing, you see it from the ability to compartmentalize. I'm interested in something you said, because actually before the World Cup started, you had some fairly strong views about rugby in Wales. And you, I think, to use your words, not mine, you did call for some seismic changes. I'm assuming that your views haven't softened off the back of the Rugby World Cup itself.
No. I remember Wales lost to Georgia going back 12 months ago. And Jamie Roberts was with me pitchside. And look, I'm a very proud Welshman. I'm very proud to play for the Lions as well, because my father and all their family are from England, so I love playing for the Lions. So I was very proud Welshman. Wales had never lost to Georgia, never mind losing to them at home, and I was like this. And I mean this with the greatest respect to Georgia. I'm embarrassed that we've got a loss to Georgia on our record, because the All Blacks would never have that. Like England wouldn't have that against Georgia. And I used to think, like, I hear people saying, "Oh, Wales, we love being underdogs." I'm like, speak for yourself. I haven't sacrificed all this to be an underdog. I want to be the king of the jungle. I want to be the standard bearer.
Lead dog.
Yeah, exactly. I want us to be the alphas, So when Wales lost, I remember just saying, me and Jamie looked at each other. The issues aren't on field. So when you're playing, you're quite selfish and you just focus on the team and the performance. But now I'm sort of I'm still in rugby, but I'm outside of playing. You sort of look at what happens at board level and from a business perspective, and there needed to be significant changes there. There's, you can't have an organization which isn't run by the correct people. And I'm sure a lot of the people who were there have Wales's interests at heart, but I didn't believe the skill set was there. And look, I wasn't the answer either, but I knew there was other people who could go in and make significant changes. And I remember me and Jamie were like, Jamie Roberts, who's now actually on the board for the WRU, ironically. We said, look, we got to call this out. And it's one of those situations where, unless it was called out publicly, it wouldn't have, I don't think there would have been a catalyst for change. So because we sort of did that, and Wales has, and not because of what I said, but Wales has taken a turn in the last 12 months and is back on an upward trajectory. But yeah, you sort of realise there's more things that make an organisation tick. It's not just the head coach, not just the players. It comes all the way from the top as well. And there needed to be changes there.
So talking about trajectories, I mean, it strikes me that off the back of the recent World Cup, rugby in some parts is in a very, very strong position, and probably in its traditional backyard, probably stronger than it's been for some time. But clearly, to move into markets that it's not currently in, and the one that comes to mind, of course, is the USA. Does rugby have what it takes to break into that market? I mean, it's hugely competitive. It's the biggest sports marketing. It's the biggest sports sponsorship market globally. Can it break through? What's it need to break through?
Yeah, we're sort of seeing the influence of, say like the MLS in football,
Yeah.
and sort of David Beckham out there, doing great things with Inter Miami and the profile of the game. Lionel Messi's gone out there. That's fantastic. And rugby has what's called the MLR. Now it's probably where the MLS is, but maybe 10, 15 years ago. But where rugby, and I think the decision makers in rugby have made an excellent choice, is for the first time ever, the Rugby World Cup in 2031 is going to be in the USA, which would be massive because it'll incentivize the USA to be better at rugby. They're pretty competitive at sevens. But I mean, look, you've competed in America. The amount of people and athletes they have over there, my goodness, you only have to watch the NFL. They've got unbelievable amount of people who could play rugby union. So I think having the World Cup out there is massive. And I've always been an advocate for supporting the sort of, you have the European competition where you have your big six teams in Europe. You have the Southern competition where you have your big four teams there: Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, Argentina. So you have the 10 teams there. Then you've got a lot of these nations, like you got the sort of Melanesians and Polynesians of Fiji, Samoa, Tonga. Then you've got in America your USA's, Canada's. There has to be more input into those because we're quite far off football, where football you go to a World Cup and there could be 15 to 20 teams who could beat each other on their day. Where rugby is like, you go to a World Cup and maybe 6 teams that are very push could win the World Cup. We want that to be 15 to 20, make it more competitive. So having the World Cup in 2031 is a massive plus. Because that's going to drive. And I'm kind of seeing it in other sort of aspects now where there's a lot more interest in rugby in America, which is great. But if we can tap into that American market, it could be a huge catalyst to really kick rugby from a popularity perspective and financially as well. Like the All Blacks got there.
I'm just smiling at one analogy you used, which was actually that the number of people playing sport at the highest level in certainly their staple sports. Up until the Jamaicans sort of sport the party, we used to say in track and field the best sprint team in the world, is the Americans sprint team, and the second best sprint team is the team the Americans leave behind. You're sport for choice, but it's a tough old market. And interestingly, I guess sitting at the heart of that, and one of the big debates in US sport at the moment is the broader impact on welfare. Mental and clearly physical. Concussion is a I mean the NFL is awash with discussion about concussion, particularly at college level. You have quite fixed views on welfare. And I guess sort of pinning you down a bit on your decision to retire at 29, there are probably a suffusion of reasons, and I've read about some of those. But was welfare one of them for you?
Yes. There's a lot of players who've come out in the UK recently, especially since and there's a film called Concussion which got Will Smith in it, and I do urge people to watch that because it's very accurate.
It's a good movie.
It's very good. And so people wear head guards. Like the analogy they use, which if you put like a golf ball in the middle of a glass with water in it, it doesn't matter how much bubble wrap you put around that glass. If you move it left and right quickly, that golf ball is going to hit the wall of the glass. That replicates your brain moving amongst the fluid in a very simplistic way. So you can't really get away from it.
But it's the same argument about head guards in boxing, of course.
And this is where I find rugby gets a little bit of unfair criticism. In rugby, if you show any sign of concussion, which a lot of people think concussion means being knocked out unconscious, concussion means it's a brain injury. So it could mean signs of that is slurring, loss of balance, feeling sick. It doesn't have to be knocked out. If you show any sign, and I have an independent doctor watching every rugby game, if you show any signs of that, loss of balance, you're off the pitch. And the earliest you can play is 7 days, more often than not 12 days for, long story short. If you've got any history, which most people do have, of concussion, you can't come back within 12 days. Now, I think that should be a bit longer still. But in boxing, if you show a concussive symptom, you've got, rather than have 12 days like rugby, you've got 10 seconds to prove you're okay, and you go back again. Now, if boxing had the same protocols as rugby, there wouldn't be a sport. So I think rugby gets quite unfair criticism. But I do agree that rugby still needs to do as much as it can, because I see a lot of players coming out who have got dementia at the age of 40, 50. I'm a little
Well,
bit.
Ryan Jones is a sad example, of course.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of them have had treatment. And look, I don't suffer with anything. And I was chatting to a lot of some of the 50-year-olds who are late 40s, 50 now in the World Cup team, winning team for England in 2003, and I say, have you got anything? And some of them are like, no, I'm absolutely fine. I think it's some people are like kind of prone to getting soft tissue injuries. I think some people might be more prone to getting brain injuries, but I'm not taking any chances. I take I am concerned about it and I take a supplement now, which is it's a mushroom called lion's mane. And there's a lot of evidence coming out that lion's mane can help brain injury. So I take lion's mane every day, not because I'm struggling, but just because I don't want to take any chances, And I played rugby
Yeah,
knowing that I might have physical limitations when I grow up. I had no clue that when I was playing that it would have mental implications. So that does
yeah,
worry me a little bit. But I was quite, even though I played a very hostile position, I probably got a lot more headbangs than other players. I didn't really suffer with. I had maybe 3 or 4 diagnosed concussions. That sounds a lot, but over the course of 200 games, that's when you're having
yeah.
100 contacts a game. I got away with it quite lightly, but I did finish prematurely because I did think the risk of playing rugby probably didn't outweigh the reward of a healthy, long family life with my kids and hopefully grandkids. I don't want to be that granddad who hasn't got a pair of knees to walk around and play, or not be able to be in a mental health to be able to talk like some people are worrying about now. So I was a little bit concerned about that. And I just thought I'd put my health as well first and my family first. And that's probably why I decided to finish probably controversially quite prematurely in a lot of people's eyes.
Well, I've always taken the view that the question you really want is why did you retire rather than why didn't you retire? And
Yes.
from that point of view, you clearly got it right. Do you think we put too much pressure on sportsmen and women? Pressure of scrutiny, of extreme training, and I'm guessing some of that might have borne on the decision that you took to retire at 29.
This is, and I mean this in the least patronizing way. People will see sportsmen and women and they just think that you're immune to all criticism.
Yeah.
And they think, oh, because they're on good money, it's okay. Look, and people say this, and I've kind of disagreed when people talk, like you hear these billionaires talk, saying money doesn't make you happy. And I'm thinking, well, try saying that to a family who've got no money, who are living in poverty on the breadline. I'm like, it makes you happier, but it doesn't make you happy. I think there's a bit of it's a bit misleading when people say money doesn't make you happy. Of course, it makes things easier. So I think people think that with sportsmen because they got money. Oh, it makes it easy. They can cope with it. Like it really affected like my family, the criticism, and I would have received death threats when I was playing. I did receive particularly during that red card period. I would have death threats and people turning up at your door. But like I remember walking into Twickenham to play England, and people like, I mean, this is where I don't want to paint a bad picture. 99.9% of people are brilliant, but you're always going to get an idiot somewhere, and people will be shouting at you abuse and stuff. But like and I can understand. I sympathise with footballers. I don't care how much money they're on. It's not nice, and money doesn't soften that. It doesn't. And someone like say Gareth Bale, who's finished recently, I have an enormous amount of sympathy for him because these football boys have to play. And like rugby, we only play maybe 10, 11, 12 high profile games a year. The club games are pretty low profile. It's only international players where you're under the microscope. Footballers are under that microscope 50 times a year. And football fans are really quite ruthless. So, I mean, the pressure and the mental resilience you need to have to play football, for example, for a long time. I admire those boys massively. And I don't want it to sound patronizing, but unless you've gone through it, it's very difficult to understand, because if you can't, people don't realize the toll it can take on you and maybe this is why I'm introverted, but when you walk into a shop and people just want to talk to you about rugby, and a lot of people are complaining. I'm like, look, they're my friends, by the way, that you're criticizing. Like, they think it's just like a computer game they can complain at. And don't get me wrong, if I could go back and live my life again, I'd do it all over again. I'm not saying I wouldn't do it, and I'm still think I'm very privileged, but I don't think a lot of people understand sometimes the pressures that sportsmen and women go through. And look, but this is where I go back to my perspective. I'm thinking, well, okay, I think I'm under pressure, but imagine a surgeon who's performing life-saving surgery on a family's kid and it doesn't go to plan. Then I suddenly think when I talk about that perspective, then I suddenly go, if I had a bad game and getting criticised and not left alone, I think, okay, imagine being that guy. It's actually not that bad. That is real heroes work, when they're trying to perform that sort of work. So it is tough, but like I said, you just got to try and get that perspective sometimes. But I do think people, need to, not all people, the minority of people, if you support your team rather than criticize, you're much more likely to get success out of them than by being overly critical, So I know it's difficult sometimes, but try and be supportive where you can. It's like when you're watching kids play at grassroots level, don't criticize them, support them. And if you support people, you're much more likely to get back a positive response.
Look, you've been characteristically generous with your time, and I don't want to intrude any further. In the words of the last 4 British Prime Ministers, I don't intend to detain you for very long. You've sort of achieved pretty much everything there is to achieve as a player. Since retirement, you've tried your hand at coaching, you've dabbled in the media. Where is Sam Warburton going to be in 5 years' time?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so because people say, where do you get your competitive kick now? And this sounds really soppy now, and I'm not just saying this. People are, what's your motivation now? I do know I have got interest. I've got a couple of business interests, which I love. I got a fitness business which is that's a passion of mine. I teach people how to be fit just from an online app. I love that. That takes up a lot of my time. I love the broadcasting. I love breaking down the game of rugby to the layman and even the rugby enthusiasts to help educate them on the game. I love being at the coalface there. So they're the two things that I love doing from a work perspective. But the one thing that's important to me most, and I said this going back when I did a documentary when I finished, they're like, what's your motivation now? And I'm like, to be a dad. I want my kids to think of me what I think of my parents. And somebody says, where'd you get your kick now? I tell you where I get my kick. And I know a lot of people won't maybe agree with this, but I'll go do the school run and my boy comes out who's 3 years old. He sees me, his eyes light up, and he sprints towards me and jumps on me like that. That is like absolute priceless for me, like absolutely priceless. And I got people I do work with now. I say, look, when you have kids, I don't expect you to be in the office till after school run because I know doing the school run is an important thing, and your kids will remember that for the rest of their days. Like being there for your kids, and I'm often doing emails 9-10 o'clock at night because I'm happy to put in the time to give a little bit more time to my kids when they're around, in the house, and then I'll just catch up on stuff in the evening because I know that's important for my kids. So my motivation now is, and the things I look forward to in life, yes, I want to build a business. Yes, I want to be a good TV broadcaster, but I want to be the best dad I can possibly be. And I want them to think of me what I think of my parents. And I guess I live half a kilometre from my parents. My twin brother lives opposite the road from me. My sister lives in between us all. And my wife's from a very similar family who are the same. We got about 24 family members in a mile radius. So family's very important to me. So I know that like a sports career, you got to put time into your family. If you want to have a good sort of successful, loving family, you got to put time into it just like anything else. And that's my main driver now.
I can't think of a better place to leave this conversation. Sam, thank you very much.
No, pleasure.
Wonderful conversation.
Oh, thank you, sir. Pleasure to catch up again. And I'll see you soon, no doubt.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Extraordinary Tales in Extraordinary Times, brought to you by CSM.